At the far edge of an ancient land, where the trees of the cursed forest grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the earth, a small village clung to the border between light and shadow. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the darkness that lived beneath those woods, the realm of the Dark Lord, an unseen ruler said to command the spirits that dwelled below. By day the people worked their fields, pretending the forest was nothing more than an old superstition. But at night, when the wind carried strange whispers through the leaves, even the elders locked their doors and prayed to never see eyes glowing from the trees. In this village was born a girl unlike any other. Her name was Amara, and from the moment she opened her eyes, people whispered that the moon itself had marked her. Her irises shimmered silver, catching even the faintest light, and her calm, quiet gaze could unnerve the bravest of men. When she walked through the village square, animals turned their heads, and children stared as though drawn by an invisible thread. Amara herself never understood the unease she caused. She only knew that she loved the soft hum of the forest, the shimmer of dusk, and the way the shadows seemed to breathe with her. Her hands were gifted, skilled beyond her years. She could weave baskets that held not just fruit but blessings, and carve wooden figures so lifelike they seemed ready to speak. Yet her own family regarded her with fear instead of pride. Her father called her eyes unnatural mirrors, and her mother avoided her touch as if it carried misfortune. At night, when she sat by the firelight, she would sometimes catch them glancing at her as though she were something they had mistakenly brought into their home. Still, Amara stayed kind, helping the old, healing the sick, and leaving small offerings of grain by the forest's edge where no one else dared to go. The villagers whispered that the shadows followed her. Some said they saw figures move behind her when she walked beneath the moonlight, mimicking her steps even when no light should have cast her image. Others claimed to hear her name whispered in the dark, not in fear but in reverence, as though something unseen already knew who she was destined to become. Amara ignored the rumors, though deep within her she sometimes felt it too, a presence, quiet but constant, waiting. Seasons passed and her beauty and skill grew, but so did the unease around her. The elders began to speak of omens, of a woman born to bridge the world of the living and the shadows below. Such a one cannot stay among us, they said. And her family, already burdened by jealousy and the hunger for survival, began to wonder if the forest would offer gold for a soul that already belonged to darkness. On nights when the wind moaned through the trees, Amara often stood at the edge of the cursed forest, watching the shifting dark as though it were calling her home. Somewhere deep in the silence, the shadows stirred and answered back. The rain stopped without warning. What began as a dry season stretched into months of hunger and thirst that cracked the earth and silenced the rivers. The once fertile fields of the village turned to brittle dust, and the air grew thick with despair. Every household clung to what little grain remained, and the laughter that once echoed through the market was replaced by the sound of empty stomachs and whispered prayers. The elders said the gods were angry, that the shadows beneath the forest had awoken, demanding tribute. Fear began to taste like truth, and even the strongest hearts started to break beneath the weight of desperation. In Amara's home the suffering cut deepest. Her father's pride had long been greater than his wisdom, and her mother's heart, once soft, had hardened into survival. The family's meager possessions were dwindling, their last goat dead, their grain jars hollow. Amara, despite her quiet skill and grace, could not fill the emptiness that hunger left behind. She spent her days weaving charms for luck, giving what little food she had to the neighbors, but her kindness only deepened her parents' resentment. To them, she was no longer a daughter but a burden marked by strange power, an omen they could neither understand nor profit from. One night, as the moon hung low and red over the forest, a figure appeared at their door. Cloaked in ash-colored robes, he called himself a messenger of the shadows. His voice was soft, steady, like the rustle of dead leaves. "The Dark Lord seeks a bride," he said, setting down a pouch of gold heavy enough to make the wooden table creak. "One who carries the light of the moon in her eyes. Give her to the forest and your suffering will end. The famine will pass and your names will be blessed." His words slid through the room like smoke, coiling around their greed. Amara's father stared at the gold, his lips trembling. Her mother's hands shook as she reached for one of the coins, its shine catching the candlelight like a promise. "It's not selling her," her father said after a long silence. "It's sacrifice. The gods will reward us for our faith." Her mother nodded, though her eyes never left the gold. They convinced themselves that Amara's strange birth had always meant she belonged to something beyond them, that sending her away was destiny, not betrayal. The decision was sealed before dawn. While Amara slept, they spoke in hushed voices, finalizing the trade that would save their name but damn their souls. Yet even in sleep, something stirred within her. The forest's wind slipped through the cracks of their home, carrying the faint echo of her name, and her heart tightened. Later that day, as she fetched water from the nearly dry stream, she overheard her father speaking to the messenger behind the hut. The words were fragmented by distance. "Tonight, the moon's rise, she will be ready." The tone of secrecy, the weight of guilt in their voices, made her blood run cold. For a moment she froze, her heart beating louder than the wind. But then she shook her head, refusing to believe her family capable of such cruelty. They were desperate, yes, but not evil. She told herself that fear was twisting her thoughts. Yet as she looked toward the forest, she thought she saw something move between the trees, a ripple of shadow shaped like a woman waiting in silence. Deep down, in the quiet place her soul had always listened, Amara felt the truth forming. Her fate was no longer hers, and the darkness had already begun to call her name. The day of the bargain began with an eerie stillness. The air was heavy, unmoving, and the clouds above gathered in thick, gray coils that threatened a storm. The village dogs refused to bark, and the rooster stayed silent, as though even they sensed that something unnatural would unfold before nightfall. By dusk, thunder rolled low across the horizon like a warning drum, and from the edge of the forest came the sound of rustling leaves that were not moved by wind. The villagers stayed inside, whispering prayers to gods they barely believed in, afraid that if they looked toward the trees something might look back. When the first drops of rain began to fall, the messenger returned. He emerged from the mist without sound, his cloak made of smoke that curled and shifted around him like living fog. His face was hidden, but his voice carried clearly, deep, calm, and commanding. "The time has come," he said. "The gods wait for their bride." He handed Amara's father another small pouch of gold, the coins clinking like hollow promises. Her father swallowed his fear and nodded, his hand trembling as he took the payment. Amara, unaware of the full truth, had been dressed by her mother in a white gown made of thin linen. Her mother's hands moved mechanically, not meeting her daughter's eyes. "You have been chosen," she said, her voice flat. "The gods have seen your worth. Tonight they claim you as their own." Amara tried to smile, though confusion and dread rippled beneath her calm exterior. She asked no questions, sensing that answers would bring pain. The rain thickened, pattering against the roof as though the heavens themselves mourned what was to come. When the messenger called her name, she stepped outside into the storm. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the village square where the elders stood holding dim torches that hissed under the rain. No one spoke. No one offered a blessing. Their faces were pale, ghostly, and silent. Amara felt the weight of their gaze like stones pressing into her back. She wanted to ask where she was being taken, but the words died in her throat. The messenger gestured toward the forest, and she followed, her bare feet sinking into the mud. As they walked, she glanced over her shoulder, searching for one last look at her family. Her father avoided her eyes, his shoulders stiff with guilt. Her mother stood behind him, clutching the doorway of their hut. For a fleeting moment, Amara thought she saw her mother's lips tremble as if she might call out, might stop this madness. But when their eyes met, her mother turned away, disappearing into the dark interior of the house. That small, final gesture cut deeper than any blade could. The villagers watched as the procession reached the boundary of the cursed forest. The torches sputtered in the rain, their flames shrinking into dull red glows. Beyond that point no one dared to step. The messenger paused at the edge of the trees and raised one hand. The forest seemed to respond, the shadows shifting, forming an archway of living darkness that pulsed with faint blue light. Amara hesitated, her breath trembling, and for a heartbeat she felt something within her stir, the same strange pulse she'd always felt near the shadows, now stronger than ever. "Do not fear," the messenger murmured. "You are going home." Lightning split the sky, revealing the world around her in stark, silver light. For an instant she thought she saw faces within the shadows, eyes watching, lips whispering her name. Then the light was gone, swallowed by night. The villagers turned back toward their homes, pretending not to hear the low hum that followed her into the trees, pretending not to see the last flicker of her white dress swallowed by darkness. The rain fell harder, washing away her footprints. And in that moment, as thunder roared and torches died, the bargain was sealed. The air grew colder the deeper they went. The forest swallowed all sound, and even the rain seemed afraid to follow. The messenger led Amara through winding paths until the trees thinned, revealing a jagged mouth in the earth. It wasn't a cave, it was an opening that breathed, exhaling warm air that smelled of stone, fire, and something older than death. The ground trembled slightly as if the land itself warned her not to enter. But the messenger did not stop. He raised his torch, its flame burning black instead of orange, and motioned her forward. As Amara stepped inside, the light of the world vanished. Only the flickering black fire remained, illuminating walls carved with ancient symbols that seemed to move when she blinked. The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped slowly, rhythmically, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The path sloped downward, twisting and spiraling until she lost all sense of direction. It felt as though she were being pulled not through space but through time itself, descending into something eternal. When they finally reached the bottom, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern that shimmered faintly with light that had no source. It stretched farther than sight, its ceiling hidden in shadow. Rivers of black glass flowed soundlessly through the stone, reflecting strange flickers of movement that weren't there. Towers of obsidian rose like teeth from the ground, and bridges hung over abysses that breathed. The silence was total, so deep it felt alive. The messenger stopped and bowed low, his smoke cloak curling away from him as though it too bent in reverence. "My lord," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time, "the offering has come." The air changed. The shadows deepened, pulling toward the center of the chamber where the light twisted into a spiral. Slowly the spiral took shape, first a shimmer then a figure. It was neither man nor beast but something in between. Its form was made of darkness, yet it glowed faintly from within, like embers trapped under glass. When it moved, it did not walk but drifted, each motion smooth, deliberate, and silent. The Dark Lord. Amara froze, her breath shallow, her pulse echoing too loud in her ears. He did not speak, yet she heard him, felt him, inside her mind like a whisper beneath her skin. The sound was not a voice but a presence, shaping itself from her own fear. "Do you know why you are here, child of the moon?" She tried to answer but no words came. Only a trembling exhale. He circled her slowly, the edges of his form dissolving into mist. Where he passed, the air rippled like water disturbed by unseen hands. "You were not given," the whisper pulsed again, "you were called." Her heart pounded, confusion and terror tangled together. "I don't understand," she managed to say. Her voice echoed faintly, swallowed by the cavern. The Dark Lord extended something like a hand, made of light and shadow intertwined, and touched her palms. Pain seared through her skin, sharp and electric, yet she could not pull away. Lines of crimson light spread across her hands, branching like veins, forming symbols she could not read. The marks glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. When he released her, the pain faded, replaced by a strange warmth. She looked down and saw the glowing sigils fading slightly but never disappearing. They seemed alive, threads of light buried beneath her flesh. "Now," the whisper said, softer this time, "you carry the mark of passage. The world above will never see you the same again." The shadows around her began to move, forming shapes, faces, eyes, long-forgotten souls. They bowed as she passed, whispering words she didn't know but somehow understood. She had descended into a realm beyond life, and though her body still trembled with fear, part of her recognized this darkness, not as a prison, but as something that had always been waiting for her. Amara sat where the Dark Lord had left her, alone in the endless chamber of silence. The marks on her palms still burned faintly, pulsing like twin hearts. For a long while she wept, her sobs swallowed by the void around her. The tears fell on the black stone beneath her feet, and to her astonishment, they shimmered faintly, each drop glowing for a moment before vanishing into the ground, leaving a trace of silver light. Then came the voices. Soft at first, like a sigh carried on the wind, then layered, countless, rising from every corner of the darkness. They were not frightening. They were familiar. Whispering in a language she had never learned but somehow knew. "Child of dusk, chosen of the fading light, daughter of the shadow that breathes." The voices wove around her, brushing her skin like silk. The air thickened and she felt it, power. Not foreign, not forced, but awakening from within her, as though she had carried it all along and only now remembered how to breathe it alive. Her fear began to unravel. The ache in her limbs turned into heat, a steady hum beneath her skin. The markings on her hands glowed brighter, lighting the darkness in soft pulses that matched her heartbeat. Every time she exhaled, the shadows shifted closer, bending toward her like reeds in a current. She raised her trembling hands and they followed her movement, obedient, alive. "I am not yours to destroy," she whispered, not sure to whom she spoke, perhaps to her family, perhaps to the void itself. "I am not your sacrifice." The shadows responded, rippling in waves across the ground. Her voice echoed stronger than before, as if the cavern itself spoke with her. She stood, her body shaking but her gaze steady. The whispering grew louder, filling the air until it sounded like 1,000 sighs of relief. From the walls, faint outlines began to emerge, shapes of women, warriors and wanderers, all formed from the same silver light that dripped from her tears. They surrounded her, bowing, their eyes glowing faintly. The Dark Lord appeared again, silent, watching from afar. His presence bent the air, but she no longer trembled under it. Instead, she met his formless gaze with calm defiance. He did not speak, yet she felt his thoughts ripple through her, testing her resolve, measuring the pulse of her courage. She did not look away. The darkness swirled around her feet, lifting gently like mist. It wrapped her shoulders, winding upward, until it rested around her like a cloak. The marks on her hands flared one last time, and when they dimmed, the whispering ceased. Only her breathing remained, steady and sure. The Dark Lord inclined his head slightly, almost in acknowledgement. You begin to understand. Amara stood taller, her eyes shining with a quiet, unnatural glow. The same moonlight that once made her family uneasy now seemed to radiate from her skin. The pain had not left her, but it had become her strength. The shadows no longer whispered of death, they sang of awakening. The chamber of the Dark Lord was silent when the whispering ceased, and from that silence came a voice, not spoken aloud but echoing through her veins. To rule the shadows you must walk through them. The words trembled through the floor, and before Amara could draw breath, the ground beneath her dissolved into mist. The first trial began with warmth, a familiar sound, laughter, and the golden light of her old home. For one heart-stopping moment she saw her mother, her father, her brothers, all alive, smiling, calling her name as if nothing had ever happened. Her hands reached out instinctively, and she almost stepped forward before she saw it. Their shadows moved wrong. Each figure cast two. One bent toward her lovingly, the other twisted away, whispering lies. Then the laughter changed. Her family's smiles sharpened into sneers. Her mother's voice filled the air, cold and cruel. You were born wrong, Amara. We sold you because you belonged to him all along. The vision wavered. The ground rippled like water. For a moment, rage clawed at her chest, and the light in her palms flared. She could have destroyed them, the illusions, the voices, the pain, but she closed her eyes instead and whispered, You cannot haunt me with what I have already survived. The mirage shattered into black dust. When she opened her eyes, she stood at the edge of a vast, silent ocean. The second trial awaited. The sea was not made of water, it was made of shadows, writhing and sighing like restless smoke. Countless faces appeared in its depths, pale and flickering. Forgotten souls. The air smelled of grief and memory. She hesitated, then stepped forward. The surface rippled but did not sink her. With each step, whispers rose around her, pleading and accusing all at once. Do not leave us, one cried. You are one of us, moaned another. Their touch was cold, their words heavy with longing. Amara's light dimmed as the sea clung to her legs, pulling, testing her strength. She clenched her fists. I will not drown in what was never mine to carry. Her marks glowed again, brighter this time, and the sea recoiled. The faces faded into peace, and the path cleared before her. When she reached the far shore, the third trial awaited, a mirror, tall as the sky, perfectly still. She saw herself within it, but this reflection was darker, wreathed in fire and vengeance. You are what they made you, the reflection hissed. Take their pain. Rule through fear. Amara stared at her mirrored self. Her body trembled, the temptation was real. But then she saw something behind that reflection, the faint outline of the women who had bowed to her before, the quiet strength of those who had been broken yet endured. She understood then, power without mercy was another kind of prison. With a steady breath, she touched the mirror. I forgive what I was, she whispered. The reflection dissolved into light, and the darkness bowed low. The trials ended. The shadows swirled around her in reverence, not as masters but as kin. She had walked through every fear and emerged not as a servant of darkness, but as its queen. When the final echo of her trials faded, the chamber grew still. The shadows that once murmured and writhed around her now knelt in silence, parting to reveal the Dark Lord. His form no longer loomed with menace, it shimmered with a quiet, regal gravity, a presence older than time itself. His voice, when it came, was not thunder but a low hum that lived inside her bones. You have walked where others drowned. You have forgiven where others would have burned. Amara looked up, realization dawning in her eyes. The fear she had once held for him melted away, replaced by understanding. The Dark Lord had never been her captor. He had been her test. His realm was not a prison, but the space between light and shadow, where every soul must one day learn to see itself without illusion. He stepped closer, and where his feet touched, the ground bloomed with faint trails of silver fire. "The living call me monster," he said softly. "But I am only the keeper of what they refuse to face, their grief, their greed, their truth. I sought one who could bear both the pain of the living and the silence of the dead." Amara's breath caught as the truth unfolded within her. She had not been brought here to die but to ascend. Her suffering, her endurance, her mercy in the face of cruelty, those were the flames that had tempered her soul. The Dark Lord lifted his hand, and the marks on hers glowed brighter, merging into patterns of luminous gold. "Your soul burns where mine once did," he murmured. "Now you shall guard this balance as I once did before you." The shadows stirred, rising in waves around her like a cloak woven of dusk and dawn. For the first time, Amara felt no division between fear and power, between light and darkness. She understood that true strength was not in dominance but in harmony, the courage to see every shade, every truth, and still choose compassion. As the Dark Lord's form dissolved into her light, the voice within whispered one final truth: "The world above sold you for gold, but below, you were found worthy of eternity." The realm of shadows stirred as if it sensed the turning of an age. The air shimmered with an energy that felt alive, pulsing through every corridor of the underworld. Amara followed the whisper of unseen winds into a grand cathedral carved not from stone but from pure darkness itself. The walls shifted like slow waves, alive and breathing, and where light should have been, soft streams of silver shadow illuminated her path. At the center stood the Dark Lord, tall and silent, his presence both ancient and weary. Around them, countless spirits and shades gathered, watching, waiting, as if all of creation had drawn breath for this moment. He regarded her with eyes that no longer burned but glowed faintly, almost human now. "You have done what I could not," he said, his voice deep enough to shake the air yet gentle enough to steady her trembling heart. "You have seen the pain of the world and chosen mercy over vengeance. The darkness is not a curse in your hands, it is a promise." As he spoke, he sank slowly to one knee before her. The shadows gasped as if the act itself broke a law older than memory. Between his hands, a crown began to form, woven from smoke embers and the faint light of dying stars. It pulsed with life, alive with centuries of power. Amara stared at it, stunned. "I am not meant to rule," she whispered. "I was sold, forgotten, broken." The Dark Lord looked up at her, a faint smile crossing what remained of his face. "And that is why you must. The ones who have known pain carry balance in their hearts." He lifted the crown, its fire not burning but glowing with warmth, and placed it upon her head. The moment it touched her, the cathedral erupted in light, not golden, not white, but the deep radiant glow of twilight, where night meets dawn. The Dark Lord's form began to dissolve, his voice echoing through the fading mist. "Rule with both shadow and heart. The realm is yours, my queen." His body scattered into tendrils of smoke that coiled once around her in silent farewell before rising into the vaulted dark and vanishing. The ground trembled as every spirit, every creature of the shadow realm bowed low, their whispers blending into a single word that rolled like thunder through the eternal night: "Queen." Amara stood tall, her eyes glimmering like twin moons, her hair flowing as though touched by the wind of two worlds. In her chest, grief and triumph intertwined, the mourning of the life she lost, and the awakening of the power she was born to claim. She lifted her hands, and the symbols marked upon them flared with golden black fire. The cathedral answered, its pillars stretching upward like arms saluting their sovereign. For the first time the shadows sang, not a dirge but a hymn of rebirth. Amara felt their devotion, their trust, their fear, and their love. She understood then that she was not just the Queen of Shadows, she was the bridge between what was forgotten and what would never die. Above, the first tremor of her reign brushed the mortal world, where the wind carried whispers of her name, soft but unstoppable, Amara, the light within the dark. Years slipped quietly through the seams of the mortal world, and the famine that had once turned neighbors into traitors and families into merchants of their own blood finally broke. Rain fell where the earth had cracked, rivers awakened, and the land began to breathe again. The village that had once traded away its daughter now thrived, its fields green and its granaries full. But with the return of life came mysteries the elders could not explain. Crops flourished even in the darkest corners where sunlight never reached. At night, lost travelers claimed that the moonlight bent itself to guide them home, and mothers whispered that soft shadows lingered near their children's beds, keeping nightmares away. The villagers began to speak of a presence, unseen, yet felt in every breath of wind and flicker of flame. They called her the Lady of Dusk, a spirit of mercy who walked between the world of light and the land of the unseen. Offerings of grain and flowers began appearing at the edges of fields, left by those who swore they had heard a woman's voice in the wind, calm and commanding, reminding them to be kind, to be just, to remember. But for Amara's family, the whispers carried something colder. Her mother's hair had gone silver, her father's hands trembled from age and regret. Though they tried to forget, her name lingered like a prayer they could not utter. Each night, her mother dreamed of her daughter's eyes, those silver, moonlit eyes, watching from the dark. Guilt had built a quiet temple in their hearts, and fear kept them from ever stepping near the forest's edge. Then one night, when the moon hung low and swollen, her mother woke to a silence too heavy to bear. Drawn by something ancient and irresistible, she went to the fields. The wind did not move. The crops stood still as if listening. And there, outlined in the faint shimmer of moonlight, stood a figure tall and still, her form wrapped in flowing black that shimmered like mist, her head crowned with faint fire. The air pulsed with reverence and dread. Her mother's knees buckled, her breath catching in her throat. "Amara," she whispered, her voice breaking like dry leaves. The figure did not speak, but her gaze was both storm and solace, an unspoken truth that cut deeper than any blade. Around her, the shadows bent in greeting, swaying like loyal subjects before their queen. Then, with a single gesture, an open hand raised gently toward the trembling woman, the air warmed and the scent of jasmine filled the night. Mercy, not vengeance, lingered in that silence. And as the wind stirred once more, the figure faded into the darkness, leaving behind only the whisper of her crown's firelight glinting on the wheat. From that night onward, the family never spoke of her again. But when they knelt to pray, they did so facing the shadows. And sometimes, if the moon was full and the air still, they swore they could feel her watching, not in anger but in eternal, distant grace. As the years ripened into uneasy peace, the villagers began to learn that blessings often come with shadows of their own. The land flourished, but those who had betrayed Amara, those whose hands had once reached for gold instead of love, could not escape what waited in the quiet hours of the night. It began subtly at first, a flicker in the corner of the eye, a shape that lingered too long in lamplight, whispers that rose from nowhere and yet carried the weight of a remembered voice. Then the dreams began, dreams that bled into waking life, dreams in which the past replayed itself not as memory but as trial. Her father dreamed of the night they took the Dark Lord's gold. He saw his own trembling hands clutching the coins as Amara was led away, her eyes searching for mercy in his face and finding none. In his dream, those coins began to melt, not into fire, but into cold black ash that clung to his skin no matter how hard he tried to wash it off. Each morning, he woke with soot beneath his nails, the smell of smoke on his hands. Her mother fared no better. Each night, she heard her daughter's voice calling from the forest, soft but relentless. "You sold light for coin, but darkness keeps the debt." The words burrowed into her heart until every reflection, water, glass, even the sheen of a cooking pot, showed not her own face but Amara's, serene and unblinking. Her cries filled the hut, but no one dared comfort her. They too had seen shadows stirring near their doorways, waiting, listening. The elders who once blessed the bargain faced their own torment. The village's high priest found that every idol in the temple wept black tears. The altar he had built from greed cracked down the middle, spilling ash instead of incense. One night, as he tried to pray, his voice disappeared entirely, leaving him to mouth words no god would hear. The healer who had declared Amara cursed lost the use of her sight, but in darkness she began to see shapes moving, souls she had condemned, faces she had turned away. She wept for every child, every girl she had judged, realizing too late that her blindness was her punishment and her gift. And still, Amara's shadow did not strike them dead. That was not her justice. Her punishment was truth, eternal, merciless reflection. The gold they had once hidden beneath their floors turned to gray dust, their dreams to confessions. Some fled the village, seeking escape in distant lands, but the whispers followed them, curling through fires, reflecting in the eyes of strangers. "You sold light for coin, but darkness keeps the debt." Yet not all were lost to despair. A few fell to their knees beneath the moon and asked her forgiveness. They began to leave offerings in the forest, grain, oil, simple prayers of gratitude. Those who sought redemption were touched by calm, their guilt softened, their lives quietly mended. But those who clung to denial found their faces fading from mirrors, their names slipping from memory, as though the world itself refused to remember them. By the time another generation was born, Amara's reckoning had become legend, not a tale of vengeance but of balance. The village learned that darkness was not evil, only honest, and that mercy, like shadow, always remembers where the light once fell. The legacy, 400 words. In the years that followed, Amara's name was no longer spoken with pity or shame. It became a whisper that carried through generations, half prayer, half warning. Villagers told stories of the Queen of Shadows, the woman who had once been human but rose beyond mortality to balance the scales of justice. They said she walked between worlds, her steps unseen, her gaze both gentle and terrible. Mothers told their daughters that power could be born from pain, that every tear held the seed of transformation. They spoke of Amara not as a ghost, but as a guardian who watched over those who suffered in silence. When crops grew in unexpected places or storms avoided certain villages, people believed it was her will, the dark mercy of the queen who once knew hunger and betrayal. Those who had betrayed her in life spent their remaining days under the weight of their choices. Some built shrines to her in quiet repentance, hoping her shadows would pass them by. Others faded into madness, unable to escape the reflection of their own greed. Yet Amara never sought vengeance. Her justice was patient, woven into the rhythm of the earth itself, harvests, seasons, and the quiet moments between heartbeats. Over time, the story of Amara became more than legend. It became a truth that shaped the moral spine of her people. Children grew up learning that power without compassion leads to ruin, and that even darkness, when guided by love, could protect instead of destroy. And on moonless nights, travelers swore they saw her, standing tall in the distance, her crown of shadows glowing faintly against the black sky. She never spoke, but her silence was its own language, one that carried both mercy and warning. They called her many names, the Shadow Queen, the Keeper of Balance, the Silent Judge. But to those who truly understood her story, she was simply Amara, the girl who had walked through suffering and emerged as something eternal. Her legacy endured not because of fear, but because of what she represented. The truth that even in the deepest darkness, light can take root, and sometimes that light wears a crown. Amara's story was not one of simple tragedy, nor of vengeance. It was the unfolding of a destiny shaped by pain but refined by purpose. Once a girl stripped of her dignity, sold by those she trusted most, she became something the world could neither define nor destroy. Her journey from the light of innocence to the throne of shadows was not a fall, it was an ascension. The darkness that once terrified her had always been waiting, not as a curse but as a calling. When she was cast out and left to die, it was the shadows that wrapped her in their cold embrace. They whispered not of revenge but of remembrance. They showed her what mortals could not see, that light and dark are not enemies but eternal companions. And in learning to listen, Amara discovered the truth. Power does not come from dominance, but from understanding both the wound and the weapon. In her final transformation she became what the world feared most, a woman who could not be controlled. The same chains that once bound her wrists became the very symbols of her authority, melted into rings of shadow fire around her hands. The voices that had once mocked her were now silent, replaced by the soft murmurs of respect and awe that followed her name. Her reign as the Queen of Shadows was not marked by cruelty or conquest, but by balance. Where greed had corrupted, she restored order. Where despair lingered, she offered calm. Her mercy was quiet, her justice profound. And though her power was born in darkness, it carried the fragrance of light, a paradox only those who had suffered deeply could ever understand. The people learned, through her legend, that the shadow is not the enemy of light. It is the canvas that allows light to be seen. Just as Amara's pain had revealed her strength, her betrayal had revealed her destiny. Every scar on her soul became a doorway to wisdom. Every tear she shed watered the ground that would one day bear her crown. Over time, the story of Amara transformed into more than myth. It became a mirror. Each listener found a reflection of their own hidden power in her tale. Women who had been silenced learned that silence could speak louder than words. Men who had abused their privilege began to fear not punishment, but the weight of their own conscience. And the children, hearing of the Queen of Shadows, grew up believing that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to rise within it. The moral of her story echoed across generations. Betrayal may wound the flesh, but it cannot chain destiny. What is meant for ruin can become the very foundation of rebirth. Amara's transformation was proof that even the darkest paths can lead to light if the soul walks them with purpose. She had lost everything, family, trust, belonging, but in the ashes of that loss she found herself. Those who spoke of her in later years said that she never truly left. They claimed that the forests around her old village grew thicker and more alive, that the air itself carried her presence. Travelers who passed through at dusk sometimes felt the wind brush against their faces, a soft, feminine breath, warm and haunting. It moved through the trees like a sigh of remembrance, stirring leaves and hearts alike. And when the moon hid behind the clouds, the shadows beneath the trees seemed to move with intention. Some said they bowed, others said they danced, but the wise knew what it was. Every shadow, for a fleeting heartbeat, bent low in a queen's curtsy. In that moment the world remembered. Not the girl who was betrayed but the woman who rose. Not the victim of darkness but the ruler who mastered it. Amara's story ended not in sorrow, but in sovereignty, a reminder that pain is never the end, only a passage. And so, whenever night falls and the air hums with unseen life, the people still whisper her name, believing that somewhere between the living and the lost, the Queen of Shadows watches still, silent, eternal and free.